The Great American Read just introduced you to America's 100 favorite books. But you know, we figured they forgot a category. So we wanted to do a show where we're going to talk about more books. And tonight, we're talking about books all about the great state of Texas. Join us. Good evening and welcome to Cover to Cover. This is ours and your book club right here on TV following the Great American Read. We're going to come to you every week after Great American Read to share more ideas, more stories, more books, and bring in people from our own community to talk about some of their favorites. We're thrilled to be coming to you from the Houston Public Library downtown at the Julie Eidson Building. But you know, I can go on about that stuff. I just want to find out what are some of our favorite books about Texas. So let's meet our panel to start off. Our first guest, Ann Weisgarber, is the author of Promise and the Personal History of Rachel Dupree. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Our next guest, you know, is a Houston Chronicle editorial writer and a frequent Texas Monthly contributor, plus the author of the new book, Hurricane Season, Joe Holly. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Ernie.
You know, our next guest is the author of Surviving Antarctica, and she just happens to be the former First Lady of the City of Houston, Andrea White. And if you're lucky enough to watch Great Day Houston, you know our next guest, the effervescent Deborah Duncan.
Oh, effervescent.
Don't you like that one? Okay, Texas. It's a great state. It's a big state. What makes it so much fun to write about? Why is there a subgenre of books all about Texas? Joe, I'll start with you.
You know, it's probably larger than life, don't you think? At least we think Texas is. I was going to tell you a story.
Okay.
Years ago, when dinosaurs roamed the Texas Panhandle, I was editor of the Texas Observer, and I commissioned this fellow named McMurtry to write a long essay assessing his fellow Texas writers, which he did. And he dissed every single one of them, except for a Houston poet named Vassar Miller. And his criticism was that Texas writers spent way too much time romanticizing the cowboy, rural life, small towns, and it was usually white men who were doing this romanticizing. And I saw Larry a month or so after the essay came out, and he had been working on a book himself at the time, which turned out to be Lonesome Dove. And I said, Larry, I thought you said we shouldn't be writing about the Old West and small town Texas. And he said, no, I didn't say that. I said you shouldn't be writing badly about the Old West.
So, Ann, who gets it right, do you think?
You know, I think the old Western themes really speak to people in the entire country. But I think we have a tendency to overlook the cities in Texas as well.
And that's what he was saying, for sure.
Yeah. And so he didn't follow his own advice, obviously, and I'm glad that he didn't, because that's, you know, glad he didn't. But I think that we do miss the city. I think the cities. I think we miss the border. I think we miss minorities in many of those stories. So there's so many more stories to tell that are out there. So we're not finished yet, even though there's been this long history of writing about Texas. There's still more to come.
Well, Deborah, when we think about that genre, are we missing the boat a lot of the time?
Yeah, because you know, you're right. We look at the symbols of the cowboy hat and the horses and all the cowboy and the whole bit. But I think what we miss is the maverick spirit, because this state was settled under great hardship, right? You look at things we say like the cities, Houston, largest medical center in the world, Spindletop, you know, in the area, powered the nation, right? As Texas goes, so goes the nation in so many different ways. But a lot of it is that maverick spirit, that entrepreneurial spirit. NASA, failure is not an option. So that's the part, I think that's the essence of any successful state.
So Andrea, what do we miss then about the great cities? When you read all these books about cowboys and the plains and all of that, what's going on in the cities that we should be sharing?
Well, you know, Houston and Dallas and all of our great cities are drawing people from all over the world here. And it's not only the food and the cultural diversity, but Texas has always been unusually diverse. When you talk, you know, we were close to the border. We had the cowboys, we had the Spanish influence. And so it's really, the past is kind of a reflection of the future in that sense.
We say Texas is a whole other country. It's true, right? Because we're not the deep South and we're not the Southwest. We are a whole other country in a sense.
Right.
But it does make me sad, you know, something Ann brought up. I mean, you can read 15 books about a street on Paris. And when I see, no, when I see the word Houston in a book, it's like my heart pounds. You know, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I mean, we just have so little coverage. Attica Locke wrote Pleasantville and some other novels set in Houston, but there's just not enough of that.
Well, and we pride ourselves on being the most diverse city in the country.
A lot of things, energy capital,
yeah,
largest
exactly.
medical center,
So,
everything.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories worth telling by a lot of different kinds of
Do
people.
we see or find or notice that Texas writers, even when not writing about Texas, write differently? Do you see any trend there?
Even when they're,
Just
we
for
would
the
identify
sake
them as
that
Texas
they
writers.
live in Texas, do they have a different approach in the way they tell a story?
Well, Anne is a Texas writer, and
Do you tell
she
stories
does
differently?
Pressure.
Do you do
doesn't
like we're
write about
gathered around the
Texas.
fireplace?
I do. I get my marshmallows out and I start roasting them, and I have my cowboy hat on. I think there is a little bit of a sensibility that Texas writers have that is unique, in that, as Deborah says, the maverick spirit, the idea that anything is possible. That when we're writing, and also you've got to write about the weather when you're writing Texas, and especially if you're writing this part of Texas, you cannot avoid the weather at all. That's just part of it. You can't avoid the landscape, and you have to talk about how big and open it is, whether it's the city or whether you're out in West Texas. So I do think Texas writers are more aware of the environment.
And there's a tradition for that. Dorothy Scarborough was back in the 20s, writing about a ranch woman in this cabin way out in West Texas, and the wind is so incessant she can't get out. The dust is blowing, and it drives her crazy.
Yeah, in
literally.
that part of Texas. Meanwhile, in another part of Texas.
Right.
Right.
Well, let me flip this whole question around then. Are there things you notice when non-Texans try and write about the state?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, they get it wrong?
Well, they get it wrong, and that's when it comes down to, are you authentic or not, right? It was funny, I had breakfast with Prince Charles, and I'm name dropping now, breakfast with Prince Charles once, and it was funny, I said, how...
Wait, hold on a second. Did you say you had breakfast with Prince Charles?
There were some journalists who were
checking.
invited to have breakfast with him.
That's not his first name, right? It's Prince,
Charlie,
Prince
you were
Charles.
having-
Charlie in my
okay.
house. And I said, so how do you like Texas? And he goes, well, I thought I'd see more cowboys, but everybody still thinks that's what it is all around the world. It's funny. I went to France several years ago, and we were guests of the government. We were going to go to Paris, and they wouldn't let us go to Paris. We had to go to everything but Paris. And I went, why? He goes, let's put it this way: there is more to France than Paris, and more to Texas than Dallas. Right? I go, you do have a point there, sir.
Right.
Oui.
Okay, let me throw that in then. Dallas, the popularity of a TV show changed the way people across the globe viewed our state.
And based on caricatures.
Yeah.
Caricatures and stereotypes of Texans.
Like Giant.
Yeah.
But aren't some of those stereotypes and caricatures a little real?
From February to the end of March, yes. When the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo is here, it's all good.
And I think there's a kernel of truth, and I think Texans have a tendency to not always like the mirror that reflects back and doesn't make them look so good, which is why people didn't like Giant. Many Texans did not like Giant or the TV show Dallas, because there are some kernels of truth behind these stereotypes. And that's why I think America and the world is fascinated with that, because honestly, we can think of some people who maybe almost fit the bill, or they come close to that.
And you remember, Ann, in Giant, early 1950s, the stereotypes, the character played by James Dean, Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor, those are the ones that people remember, but an integral part of that novel is race relations.
Yes.
And race bias and difficulty.
Yes, and it was very honest and blunt. And there were a lot of Texans who did not appreciate that.
And of
about
course,
the
Edna
book.
Ferber is a non-Texan.
Yes. So she had, she dared to put this mirror up and say, this is what I see in this state, and it's not perfect. And that's a hard truth.
Remember, we're interested in what you like to read and your thoughts on this topic. You can join us on Twitter at #CoverToCover. But now we want to find out what our panel thinks are their favorite books about, by, for Texas. So, Andrea White, you want to start us off? What's your book?
Sure. I mean, I've clearly got the best book here. It's Lonesome Dove by
The fattest
Larry
one.
McMurtry.
Yeah, it's
which
quite a
came-
thick book, though. We'll
which-
give you that.
Quite a thick book, which came out in 1985. And it's about two aging Texas Rangers who take a last cattle drive to from their South Texas ranch to Montana. And it just succeeds on so many levels. I mean, and yes, it's much better than the movie.
Okay. Do you have something to read for us, Renee?
Sure. One of the great things about it is the humor, and that's why it's so much better than the movie, because every page is just funny, laugh aloud funny. And so the passage I picked to show the humor was about the silly sign that Gus carved. And it says, in the end, he and Call argued so much about what was going to go on the sign that Call got disgusted and washed his hands of the whole project. At first, he had started out spare and just put the name of the firm, Hat Creek Cattle Company and Livery Emporium, but that caused controversy in itself. Cal claimed nobody knew what an emporium was, including himself, and he still didn't, despite Augustus's many long-winded attempts to explain it to him. All Cal knew was that they didn't run one and he didn't want one, whatever it was, and there was no way something like that could fit with a cattle company. However, Augustus had his way and an emporium went on the sign. He mainly put it in because he wanted visitors to know that there was at least one person in Lonesome Dove who knew how to spell important words.
Oh, that's a great passage.
And I never think of the humor when I think of that book.
Oh,
which
it
is a great idea.
It is. It's not only the characters, the gamblers, the buffalo skinners, the prairie settlers that just come alive and real from the page and really are drawn from history, but the philosophy, it's a lot about the meaning of life. The fact that this cattle drive started out very aimlessly, but because the two characters lived their values of truth and respect for the law, it acquired meaning along the way. So, you know, you can read it on a lot of levels and it succeeds on every single one of them.
That's what makes a good book, the levels that you can read it on. Joe, what do you have for us?
I have a book that's set in 1870 in Texas by a woman named Paulette Giles, who lives on a ranch near Utopia, Texas. And it's about a 70-year-old man whose job is itinerant news reader. In other words, he goes around to small towns, and he's an early day aggregator. You know, he gets passages and stories from the Times of London, or the New York Times, and people gather in music halls or theaters and listen to him read. And he's up in Wichita Falls, and he's charged with the responsibility of taking a 10-year-old girl who was captured by the Kiowa. She lived with him for 4 years. He's supposed to take her back to her people close to Castroville, you know, west of San Antonio. She does not want to go. She did not want to leave the Kiowa. And so the novel, called News of the World, is about the adventures from Wichita Falls on down to Castroville. I left the book at home, so I brought passages here. An excerpt, right. Paulette Giles is a poet as well, and I think you can hear it in this passage. The noise of horses and mules eating, their teeth like grindstones moving on one another, and the occasional snort as hay dust got up their noses, the shifting of their great cannonball feet. That's one passage. Here's another. Above and behind them, the dipper turned on its great handle as if to pour night itself out onto the dreaming continent.
I love language. I love when it's
she's amazing. Yeah.
And I have to say, though, I love hearing you read to me. You can sit by my bed every night, read me to sleep. You just have such a soothing way. I'll call you. Okay, and what have you got for us?
Well, I brought Blood and Money, and it's so old it's shedding all over me.
Sign of a good book.
It is a sign of a good book, and this was written by Thomas Thompson. It was published in 1976. It takes place in Houston's River Oaks. Actual street addresses are given. This involves the death of a 38-year-old socialite. Her name was Joan Robinson Hill. And her father, who was an oil man, Ash Robinson, is convinced that Joan's husband had her poisoned. And he sets out to prove his theory. And 2 years after Joan has died, rather mysteriously, then John Hill, her husband, is gunned down at his River Oaks home. It's all blood and money. It's oil money. It's oil money. It's Houston. It is, we've got trials. We've got a private eye by the name of Clyde Wilson. We have an up-and-coming attorney by the name of Racehorse Haynes who gets involved in this story. We have a hitman. We have a hit woman. We have an important witness who gets gunned down in a police shootout. We have a body that's dug up twice.
Stereotypes.
I know,
Is it really stereotypes?
And it's claimed to be the true story. And so this, is actually nonfiction, but
But you probably don't have an attorney in Chicago, New York, wherever, named Racehorse.
No, Racehorse Haynes and a private eye, Clyde Wilson.
Right.
So I think that's very much Houston. But this was a story about Houston at the time. So I've got a really short little passage to read. This is about Joan Robinson, the woman who dies before she's married. Joan Robinson was princess of cafe society, that slightly ill-mannered relative of the old guard, the principal difference being that the former performed its antics in public with new oil money, and the latter stayed at home with dollars stored up from the generation before. Cafe society even had its official birth date in Houston, that being the evening of March 17, 1949, St. Patrick's Day, when a wildcatter named Glenn McCarthy opened the Shamrock Hotel. The Shamrock was the Paris Ritz redoubled in spades. It was the place to go, the place to be seen, the place for the rich and the restless in Houston. Joan Robinson, in effect, set up headquarters there. So the prose is a little purple, but the story holds up. And I just read it a couple months ago. It is a page turner.
But see,
You
what I
also
love,
said he wrote it like a novel.
He did write
that's
it
what I
like
was
a
going to say,
novel.
that just because it's nonfiction doesn't mean it can't have all the flair and the beauty
Exactly.
and the language and the usage and all of that. Speaking of flair and beauty and quality usage, what was the book you picked, Deborah?
I picked Life is an Adventure by Warner Roberts. And what's so cool about her is that she had a talk show in the 70s. And that was a time when they're still trying to figure out if women could make any sense, right? I mean, you might put a pretty woman next to a very meaningful news anchor man, right? But, and she kind of was a trailblazer for women like me in the television business. But Warner, she's always smiling, she's always happy. And what she talks about in this book is just how many times that she was challenged, and the only way to get through was to be her authentic self. Okay, now I'm gonna put my glasses on. Thanks for Ernie for making people realize I'm old enough to need glasses now. Okay.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, right, okay. She says here, happiness has to become a habit, like brushing one's teeth. If you don't brush them, they rot. Life is always going to be filled with problems, changes, challenges, or disappointments. Therefore, we should meet life with the most positive attitude possible. If I could give my sons anything in the world, I would give them a sense of humor, optimism, and enthusiasm. And as we were talking earlier just about Texans, right? I think that's the thing that sits at the heart with so many people, is that we have that enthusiasm, that sense of humor, and that work ethic. Anybody who came to Houston in the summertime and stayed has some enthusiasm
that they were.
and the whole bit. But yeah, she's just been such a cool woman in my life personally. And what I love about books today is that it used to be you wrote this manuscript and send it off to some big company somewhere, crossed your fingers and hope that you got a response. But today there are so many different ways to publish. And this one was published in 2018, so it's the youngest book here.
Oh, great.
Oh, wow. And she'd be happy to know that fact.
Yeah, she actually did a talk show at PBS and of course at Channel 11.
Yeah,
so.
she has been a true trailblazer, and I think that's something that sits through all Texas books, our trailblazing, being out there. Joe, over the years, do you see the way people write about this state changing?
Well, I think it is changing, certainly from within, partly because there is that diversity of authors now. There are women, there are minorities, there are old, young, there are city people, there are country people. So that's changing, and I think people around the country are also beginning to realize, as Texas asserts itself in ways that we have been describing, they are beginning to realize, as they read about Texas, as they hear about Texas, that there's more to it than the cowboys, the oil man, the flamboyance, the larger-than-life folks.
Well, I think we've gotten way too smart for our own good right now, so I'm going to dumb things down. We're going to play a game. Are you guys ready?
We're always ready.
You have heard of HQ. It's a very popular game right now. Well, we have LQ. This is our literary quotient, and we're going to see how well our panel can do. Our panel have all been given their dry erase boards because we're a high-budget show, so here we go. We're going to start our first question. James A. Michener's modern-day classic Texas was first published in 1949, 1963, 1974, 1985. I love this question. Oh, they're cheating on this side already?
I thought we were teams.
No, you're not teams.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Oh, these people. Okay, let's see your answers. What do you think? We have 63, 85, 63, and 85. 2 people have it right, 2 have it wrong. Who thinks they have it right?
I think they have it right.
It's 85.
Yeah.
The reason I love that question is I thought that book was around a lot longer than
did
it was.
Well, it takes a long time to read
It does take a long time.
It's not only long, it's
They've been reading it since
long and
1985.
tedious, yes.
Okay, next question. When Texas author Larry McMurtry isn't working on writing books about Texas or the Old West, he keeps busy with his other interest, his used bookstore, cattle ranch, painting, or McDonald's franchise. They're writing away here. Okay, we ready to see?
Anytime.
Reveal. Painting, used bookstore,
Used
bookstore. What do you think, Deborah? Are you right and they're all wrong?
I want him to paint.
Well, he's not. He
He
owns
paints a picture.
a used bookstore.
She's breaking news.
She is breaking news.
All right, here we go again. Which Texas book adaptation won the most Academy Awards? Was it Giant, No Country for Old Men, Trip to Bountiful, or Tender Mercies? Who won the most Academy Awards?
Can you say that again? The
I
the
can.
answer?
It is Giant, No Country for Old Men, Trip to Bountiful, or Tender Mercies.
That's a good question.
Isn't that a good one?
No.
Like I told you, if it's not like about a pig and a spider's
spider, you
web,
don't
I don't
know?
know the answer for you. Or Prince Charles.
Well, let's find out how well you folks think you have it. Waiting, here we go. We've got Tender Mercies, Giant, Tender Mercies, and No Country for Old Men. Congratulations, Deborah. No Country for Old Men. 4 Academy Awards it won. Want to try another one? You guys up for this?
Certainly.
This is fun.
All right, this is fun. The rest of it. Oh, but this part we enjoy. Okay, if you were to read the Lonesome Dove series of novels in chronological order, when would you read the book entitled Lonesome Dove? First, second, third, or fourth? If you were to read the Lonesome Dove series in chronological order, when would you read the book entitled Lonesome Dove? First, second, third, or fourth?
Did the dove start out lonely or end up lonely?
Right, you never know. I'm hoping you get it right because you got
Well,
it
it's
right
kind
there.
of a trick question.
Yes, it is kind of a trick question. I will give you one of the tricky. Lonesome Dove was published first.
Right.
But where does it fit into this? Okay, reveal. Second, third, second. Joe, you're right. It is the third.
That's what I
I
had.
knew there
You
was
didn't
a
see it right
prequel,
here.
but
Yeah, I
didn't-
wasn't sure.
I had
Oh,
third.
you had it down.
I had third right here.
That's right. Very good.
Okay, very last question. Very pop culture-y. Here we go. In Charlaine Harris's Supernatural series, Manfred Bernardo, who is escaping his past, is told to seek out refuge in Midnight, Texas. But who tells him to do that? A fortune teller, his yard man, Madonna Reed, or the ghost of his grandmother?
Oh my goodness.
Come
I
on
think they're
now.
all just guessing on this panel. Do you know it at home? Hashtag cover to cover. You can share your answers and we'll see how you're doing. Let's see how our folks are doing. And who told them? Ghost?
This is my guess.
Yard man. Christian Gray.
That's my default answer for everything.
It is the ghost of the grandmother.
Did you guess?
Did I guess? No.
You
Well, you know
knew
what?
it?
I never even
You
heard of
don't
what he
have
was
to
talking
guess
about.
anymore because you know what? We've come to the end of the show. It was that quick. It was that easy. It was that much fun to have you all on. Thank you for joining us. I want to tell you next week our topic is going to be Who Am I? We're going to be talking about books and characters that allow us to examine stages of our personal growth. And who's going to be talking with us? Well, the author of Moxie, it's Jennifer Mathieu, and TV weatherman Frank Billingsley will be here, filling the TV seat. I want to thank Ann and Andrea, for joining us. I want to thank Joe and Deborah for joining me, and I want to thank you for watching. I also want to thank the Houston Public Library for allowing us to do our show here. We'll be here every week during the Great American Read, so we hope you'll keep watching. Remember to vote at the Great American Read at pbs.org for your favorite book. And by the end of the series, they're going to announce America's favorite novel. We don't want you to miss that. If you have thoughts and ideas you want to share with us, hashtag #CoverToCover. You can do that on Twitter, and we'll be following along with that. And so until next time, on behalf of Houston Public Media, I'm Ernie Manouse. Thanks for watching, and keep reading. Bye-bye.